Thank you very much. So,
Welcome
as I said,
back, everyone.
Today my topic is on motivated intruders.
By Luke Pajor.
So,
Started a little too early. There we go.
Hello, everyone. First of all, my name's Luke, but before I get started on my topic of motivated intruders, I just want to have a quick shout out to the organizers and everyone else for turning up. Thank you. And of course, to everyone else who has spoken before me. You have all delivered some great talks, absolutely brilliant, and I've learned so much from those. Thank you very much. So, as I said, today my topic is on motivated intruders. So, in short, why have I chosen to discuss motivated intruders with you today? It's simply because, whether you may be aware of it or not, it is not a traditionally hot topic of discussion around security. Plus, they are also not given the same amount of scrutiny, examination, and observation as insider and outsider threats are. And I'd also just want to bring some awareness to the subject matter and see what we can do about it going forward. Just some brief points first before I get into the meat of the topic. First off, insider threats, motivated intruders, and outsider threats. Their motivations, as they are people, traditionally speaking, I mean, a Trojan horse doesn't have a motivation. Their motivations do intersect. They are not too dissimilar. The results of their actions are also quite similar in the sense of they compromise data, they cause damage, among other things. While they still have all of this in common, they still differ in very significant ways, which I'm going to take you through as the talk progresses. So, anonymization is our first one. What is anonymization? You may ask. In short, it is the process of rendering data into a form which does not identify individuals and where identification is not likely to take place. We've also got pseudonymization, the first tongue twister of the day, so please excuse me if I lose my train of thought and get tongue-tied pronouncing these words as we go. But back to the subject, what is it? Pseudonymization is the processing of personal data in such a manner that the data can no longer be attributed to specific data subjects without the use of additional information, provided, of course, that additional information is kept separately and isolated and is subject to technical and organizational measures to ensure that the personal data is not attributed to an individual or identifiable natural person. Next definition, we've got re-identification and de-anonymization. These two terms are used interchangeably. So what is it? In short, it is described as the process of analyzing data or combining it with other data with the result that individuals become identifiable. And that, of course, leads us to the definition of a motivated intruder. A motivated intruder, in short, is someone who is well-resourced and competent and is able to employ investigative techniques. My personal opinion on this, of that particular definition, is that well-resourced is a highly open-ended term. To me, it can just be someone with a simple innate curiosity and, of course, has access to the internet or other sources of information such as libraries, etc. So, as I touched upon previously about the motivations of these types of attackers or intruders, why the motivation? In short, in the case of journalists, they're motivated to get their story, the scoop of the century, or something along those lines. And it is their job to, bring data to the forefront. We also have, of course, financial attainment or other maleficent reasons. We got political activism or hacktivism. This is usually operations against a organization, person, or other entity. Some grand examples include the hacker group Anonymous, as I'm sure who you're perfectly well aware of for hacking and de-anonymizing data. Even groups such as Greenpeace do partake in such activities. There is also curiosity. What I mean by this is just ordinary people like you and me who just want to see what's going on around the neighborhood, for instance. So we look around for crime statistics about what's going on in our neighborhood. And the closer it is to home, the more likely we're going to be able to de-anonymize that particular subject, because we may know someone, family, friend, or anyone else who was involved in that particular incident. There are also personal motivations, as I've already noted. Trojan horses don't have a motivation. It's always pushed by a person, a living being behind that. And personal motivations vary from person to person, naturally. So how does this actually work? Or what does de-anonymization look like? Well, let me give you an example here. As you can see, we've got here a news article from Washington, D.C., which is accompanied by a Washington, D.C. based hospital, their hospital report or record. As you can see in the article, it's got here a 60-year-old Soap Lake man crashed on his motorcycle on Saturday afternoon, and he was allocated to Sacred Heart Hospital. Now, look on the left-hand side. As you can see, you've got the hospital record. Look at the sheer amount of data that's being shared. You've got the address and name of the hospital, the code, length of stay, the discharge date, and of course, you've got his address and age. In America, whether you're aware of this or not, in 33 states, hospitals or that particular institution type are obligated to share data with governments and other entities. That is alone is a very terrifying thought about how easy it is to access data, because as you can see from this example, it's not just you and your doctor, it is you, your doctor, and now everyone else. So that brings me on to my next point of how do we prevent our data from becoming so publicly available in such a data-rich sharing society. So the first thing I want to discuss is data anonymization techniques, or masking, and its variants. Data masking, in short, just involves removing personal identifiers, such as names, from a piece of information to create a data set in which no personal identifiers are present. Its variants include partial data removal. This results in data where some personal identifiers, such as names, addresses, postcodes, and so on, have been removed, but other tidbits of information, such as date of birth, remain. We've got data quarantining. This is the technique of only supplying data to a recipient who is unlikely or unable to have access to the other pieces of data that will be needed to facilitate re-identification. These are all relatively high-risk de-anonymization methods. Let me give you an example, the electoral roll data. This, of course, can be used to reintroduce names that have been removed to the dataset fairly easily. So, due to its richness, it's very easy to re-identify data subjects. That now brings us to another technique known as aggregation and its variants. So, what is that? Data aggregation is displayed as a total. So no data relating to or identifying any individual is shown. Small numbers in totals are often suppressed through a process called blurring, or by being omitted entirely. That also takes us to cell suppression. So what is cell suppression? If data from a sample survey, then it may be inappropriate to release tabular outputs with cells which contain small numbers of individuals, let's say below 30. This is because the sampling error on such cell estimates would typically be too large to make the estimates useful for statistical purposes. In this case, of course, suppression of cells with small numbers, though, for quality purposes, they act in tandem with suppression for disclosure purposes. Let's say, for an example, data can be linked to wider geographical areas, or age bands could be expanded and widened. We now move on to inference control, which is when some cell values, let's say 1 to 5, in statistical data can present a greater risk of re-identification. This is dependent on the circumstances, so small numbers can either be suppressed or values manipulated, which is often referred to as Bernardization. If a large number of cells are affected, then the level of aggregation can be changed. This also brings us to perturbation, which is a method of disclosure control for tables or counts. It involves randomly adding or subtracting 1 from certain cells in the table. Rounding, which is a figure up and down to disguise precise statistics. Let me give you an example of that. Rounding, let's say if one table has a cell with a value of 10,000 for all people doing some activity up to the present date. However, let's say the following month, that figure in the cell rises to 1. Now, if an intruder compares the tables, it would be easy to deduce a cell of 1. Rounding prevents this. We also have now sampling. In some cases, when very large numbers of records are available, it can be adequate for statistical purposes to release a sample of records selected through some stated randomized procedure. By not releasing specific details of this sample, data holders can minimize the risk of re-identification. Synthetic data as well, which involves mixing up the elements of the data set or creating new values entirely, which are based on the original data, so that all of the overall totals and values of the set are preserved but do not relate to any particular individual. We also have tabular reporting, which is just in short a means of producing tabular or aggregated data. This protects against re-identification. Now, these methods in particular are relatively low risk because it's generally difficult to find anything out about a particular individual by using aggregated data. This data does not support individual level research, but this can be sufficient to analyze social trends on a regional basis. We also come to derived data items and banding. What are these? Derived data is a set of values that reflect the character of the source data but hide the exact original values. This is usually done by banding, which produces coarser-grained descriptions of values than in the source data set. An example of replacing birth dates or years, addresses by areas of residence or wards using partial postcodes or rounding exact figures so they appear in a normalized form. This resulting data can be relatively rich because it can facilitate individual level research, but it prevents really low level re-identification risk. Now, let's see some examples of these techniques in action. An example being, let's use the University Stephen Research Center, or USRC's data study on individuals who have been on special assistance benefit with a certain body mass index, or BMI for short. Look at it here. You've got their names, addresses, and date of birth, and how long they've been specifically on special assistance benefit and their body mass index, of course, followed by their research cohort reference. Now, let's say, as an example, a hospital or another research institution wishes to conduct a study on people with a certain BMI and if they've received benefits or not. This is what the USRC will give them if they conduct a proper nominalization process. As you can see, a name address, and date of birth have been removed. The period of assistance benefits has been widened, the band, so less than 2 years, greater than 5 years. But all the necessary data, such as the BMI, age range, and research cohort numbers, still there for the institution to do a proper study. So that brings me on to my next point now. Enough on techniques. How do different branches of society deal with it, such as, let's say, the judiciary? The judiciary, in short, counts as motivated intruders. Predominantly journalists is their main thing, with court orders and judgments that grant anonymization of those involved in a certain case by invoking the Contempt of Court Act 1981. In brief, should a journalist or anyone else choose to make the requested data subject publicly available or de-anonymize it, they will be facing at least 2 years imprisonment accompanied by hefty fines. Now, how do the government deal with it? For this particular talk, I've chosen to stick to the Office of National Statistics as an example, the ONS, because they are a very data-rich and data-heavy usage part of the government. As you know, the demand from users of government departments has necessitated data to be more vigorously assessed prior to disclosure. The ONS themselves have, of course, released guidance on this matter, and they refer to identifiable data as microdata. So, moving on with that, the ONS have 2 types of testing, internal and external. Let's go through their differences. Internal tests are conducted by volunteers who are working in the department that wishes to release the data set. They normally spend about half a day attempting to de-anonymize data subjects. External testing, which is carried out by a separate organization, participants are provided typically with a list of persons, businesses, and are requested to identify them. And on that note, what defines the success of either test? Well, success of either test is measured with the number of correct identifications, along with associated confidence percentages, which in short means how confident the supposed motivated intruder feels that they've been able to re-identify the data subject. So, moving on, as you can see, we've got 4 steps for how the ONS deal with it. They basically tabulate the data and variable combinations, and they look for low counts or distinctive patterns, such as where non-zero counts are distributed among a small number of cells in rows or columns. If there are unique or rare combinations in the data, they apply disclosure control to the problematic variable. These can include the removal of variables or records, recoded, or record swapping. Continuing on, they tabulate the variable combinations again from the protected microdata. If there are no obvious disclosure issues, then they skip to step 4. Otherwise, steps 2 and apply more disclosure control. Then they carry out intruder testing. If there are many successful claims, then steps 2 to 4 will need to be repeated. And of course, finally, naturally, the published data under the required license. And there are a variety of these, such as open and restricted. Now, this brings me to, how do corporations and other aspects of society deal with it? As you can see, let's go through some examples. We've got Yahoo, we've got Adult Friend Finder, Disney Plus, Clubhouse, LinkedIn, and of course, Facebook, perhaps the most famous. So how do all of these businesses deal with motivated intruders? The short answer, unfortunately, is they don't deal with it very well. Take, for instance, the Yahoo example. Yahoo had a data breach in 2013 where the data of 3 billion people was compromised, 3 billion customers. I don't know about you, but I've been affiliated with Yahoo. I've used their services, and I imagine everyone else has as well. And they only decided to tell us this in 2017. Disney Plus have denied it. Clubhouse also denied it. So, as you can imagine, they only deny these things, though, to protect their reputation and business, because admitting weakness in this respect, that you're unable to keep your customers' data safe, is probably not the greatest idea. But transparency is also called for. It's easier said than done, because minus mass surveillance that the government conducts on us, its citizens, anonymization is key, hence why anonymizing data is so straightforward for them. But in terms of a business like Yahoo, Google, that is their revenue stream. Data sharing is what they're built upon. So anonymizing data is not in their best interest for the bottom line. But that also brings me to the next point. How would they deal with it? Well, testing for motivated intruders is very similar to penetration testing in certain respects, that a theoretical analysis needs to be carried out. Basically, we look at what kind of data is stored, how it is stored, and accessed, and how granular it is. That also then brings us to the practical analysis test, where we use a mix of skilled and unskilled testers in an ideal world to conduct searches and correlate data to re-identify it. If any of these results take more than an hour, I would probably say, and I'm sure you would all agree with me, it's not worth a motivated intruder's time, because time with anything is the most precious resource. So when do we use testing? Well, when there is empirical evidence of whether the data can be published or whether further protections is necessary. It enables data users to understand the overall sensitivity of a database. Also, this highlights vulnerabilities in data, specifically variables of concern that an intruder target to make a disclosure, consider removal or recategorization. And finally, this also emphasizes what pieces of information that might be combined with the data for de-identification. This is also known as a mosaic or jigsaw effect, respectively. Of course, there are also ethical considerations to account for when testing. Some of these include ensuring that, as far as possible, intruders will act in a trustworthy way, meaning, well, they need security clearance to carry the tests out and they can be counted on. Also, ensuring that intruders are aware that should they release the data or use it in any shape or form, there will be penalties involved, whether that be hefty fines, lawsuits, among another plethora of punishments, if that's the right word. A separation of process between who is analyzing and validating claims and who is actually intruding. Intruders are also told to search for individuals who are known to the checker, for example, employees they work with. Discussion and consideration of the geography, so that the intruders have limited chance of inadvertently re-identifying data concerning individuals who are known to them. Ensuring that the intruder is not told also which claims they make are correct, so they do not learn anything new about identities of respondents in the data. So what can we do going forward? Well, basically we can raise awareness, advise more businesses, governments and other branches of society that may require a test, and implementing the motivated intruder test, of course, into a risk assessment will promote best practice as well, just basically creating the habit. We can also be smarter about how we conduct data sharing. And I'm sure, as is quite common knowledge with all of you, policies of today do not quite align with technology. Technology changes faster than policy, naturally. So that also brings us to broader questions for further discussion, such as, is there a critical point where data should be but cannot be anonymized? data breaches, such as with the cases of Yahoo and Facebook. Who is accountable for this and who takes responsibility? This is why the governments and other law institutions struggle to deal with data breaches, because these companies and their resources are simply so vast. It's going to be difficult to pin down where exactly they went wrong as well. Data scraping as well is also a perfect opportunity for motivated intruders and other attackers. So what can companies and governments do about that? Also, there is, on a final question, in relation to court orders, etc. What do we do about data that is already de-anonymized and publicly available? Because this data that is can already be linked to other cases. On that final note, here are my contact details, my LinkedIn and my Discord. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all today, and I hope you have all learned something valuable and new. Thank you for your time.